Hello everybody, today we're going to learn Python as fast as possible. So, in order to develop something in the computer, we have to talk computer language. And computers can only understand zeros and ones. So, people may program languages which allows us to talk to the computer more easily. A very popular program language at the time that I'm speaking right now is Python. And the average salary of a Python developer in US is 76K, while the top guys out there get just a little tiny immediate amount of $107,000. To code Python straight out from the browser, we will be using the W Free Schools editor. This video is not sponsored by the W Free Schools, but it's a very great website. The environment is simple. At here, you code. This line will get executed first, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and you'll get the gist. The way that our program executes is called a program's algorithm. Many people think that algorithm is hard and they say that you have to write the algorithm first. But if anyone ever says that to you, I want you to straight up hit them with the microphone right to the nose, because little 12-year-old me, which I am 12-year-old, I've been coding for about a year, and for a very long time I didn't know what algorithm was, but I made some pretty great programs. And if I getting off the track, so after you have written your code, you want to click on the run button, and then your code results will appear here. According to the traditions, our first program should always start by printing hello world into the screen. In order to print something to the screen in Python, we're going to use print and then parentheses and then whatever we want to print. In this case, we want to print some text. And in order to say Python this is text and not code, we're going to either use single or double quotes and then whatever we want to. In this case, it's going to be hello world. And if we go click on run, we can see that it prints hello world to the screen. Comments, what are they? What they do? Well, I'm here to tell you. A comment does absolutely nothing. It's just a little message for us, a programmer, in order to note. So, in order to write a comment in Python, we're going to use hashtag, and then whatever after this hashtag, it's going to be a comment. So let's go ahead and say, I don't know, a comment, okay? And comments can also come after code. And if we go ahead and run this thing, we can see that it does nothing new. Variables are used to store data in Python. In order to make a variable in Python, first we're going to type in its name, which can only include letters and underscore. And after you have written a letter or an underscore, you can go ahead and add in a number, but you cannot add a number at first. And then an equal sign, and then its value. In this case, I want it to be a number. In Python, you can do some mathematical stuff like adding, subtracting, multiplication, division, and also there's the modulus operator, which will actually give us a remainder of division of two numbers. And after you have declared your variable, you can go ahead and at any time just call its name, and what this will do is that it will get the value inside of it, as you can see. And then whenever you want to, you can also go ahead and change the value into something else. In this case, let's go ahead and change it into 16. And if we go ahead and run it, we can see that at first it was 0, but after we change it and change into 16. Data types are used to describe something. The only ones that we have came across so far are whole numbers and also text, which in Python we call them strings. But there's actually a lot more. For example, there's floating point numbers. There's also booleans, which can either be true or false. There is also a non-data type that will basically describe absolutely nothing. We can add numbers together and also strings together. Try to add one together and you'll get an error. In order to fix this problem, we have to convert one into another. To convert a number into a string, use str. And to convert a string containing a number, use int if it's a whole number, and use float if it's a decimal one. Lists are used to store more than just one data. In order to create one, use brackets and then you separate the data that you're storing with commas. In order to access the data, we're going to use a bracket and then the index of that data. Remember that indexes in list and in Python in general starts from 0 and not 1. Tuples are pretty similar to lists, but they're written with parentheses and you cannot also change their elements value. Sets are pretty similar to tuples, however they're written with squiggly brackets and you cannot also index them. They also do not allow duplicates. As you can see, it simply just gets removed. Dictionary syntax really looks like a set. The dictionary is just like a list, however instead of each element having an index, they all have a key and the key is separated by a column. And then whenever we want to get access to an element, instead of giving its index, we have to give its key. A function is a block of code which will only get executed when we call it. In order to create a function in Python, we're going to type def and then our function name, which is going to follow the same rules as a variable name, and then parentheses and then a colon, and here is going to be our code block. If we want a line of code to be a member of our code block, we have to add a tab before it. So now let's go ahead and do what our function wants to do. In this case, I want to print hello world. Now, whenever we want to call our function, we have to type in its name and then parentheses. And we can call our function as many times as we want to. We can add parameters into our functions and separate them by commas if there's more than just one. And whenever we want to call our function, we have to fill those parameters with their values, and these parameters will then act as little variables only for our function. We can also use a return statement in order to return something whenever they use what's inside of our function. And it's also pretty important to note that after you return something, you immediately exit out of your function. This is why this print statement over here will never get executed. An if statement will execute a block of code if a certain condition is true. In order to make a if statement in Python, we're going to type if and then our condition, which in this case mine is going to check if 1 is equal to 1, and then a column, and then our code block. 1 is equal to 1, so it prints hello world. But if we go ahead and change this thing into 2 instead and run it, we can see that it does absolutely nothing because 1 is of course not equal to 2. There's also something known as an elif statement, which will execute a block of code if a certain condition is set and the condition above it is false. In order to make one, we're just going to type in elif and then a condition, which in this case is going to be checking if 1 is less than 2, and then a code block. We can see that it hasn't printed hello world because 1 is not equal to 2, but 1 is of course less than 2, so it prints hello nugget. There is also something known as an else statement, which will execute a block of code if all the conditions above are false. In order to make one, we're just going to type in else and then a column and a code block. If I go ahead and change all of these things into false and click on run, we can see that it prints something else. Loops are used to execute a block of code multiple times. Loops are used to execute a block of code multiple times. See what I did there? In Python, there's two types of loops. There is a for loop and a while loop. A for loop is used to loop over a list elements. In order to make a for loop in Python, we're going to type for and then a variable name. In this case, I'm going to call it x, and then in, and then a list, and then a column, and then finally the code block. And what this is going to do is that it's gonna loop through this array and it's gonna store that array's element that we're currently on inside of x. For example, let's go ahead and actually print this x, and if we go ahead and run it, we can see that it looped through this list and it stored whatever was the current value that was looping through inside of x, and when we printed it, we printed that value. A while loop will keep looping through a code block as long as our condition is true. In order to make one in Python, we're going to type while and then our condition. For example, in this case, while 1 is equal to 2, and then the column, and then a code block. And what we're going to do in here is that we're going to, for example, print hello world. And I'm not going to run this because this is a dangerous loop that will never end, because 1 is always not equal to 2. So this will always print hello world. In Python, there's a lot of errors, and of course, there has to be a way to handle these errors. So, in order to handle errors, what we're gonna do is that any code that might give you an error, what you're gonna do is that you're going to put it inside of a try, okay, and you're also going to make an except, and then some code in here, okay. And what's gonna happen is that if you go ahead and run this, instead of giving us the error, which is of course dangerous for a fully fledged program which you want to actually release, it's going to do whatever is inside of this except. In Python, there's actually a possible way of making our very own data type. So let's go do that. In order to do that, we're going to use classes. So let's go ahead and make a class by using class, and then whatever a class name is. In this case, I want it to be a chat, and then a colon and a code block. And each class is going to be full of functions, but a very important function is actually the underscore underscore init underscore underscore function. And this function will get called whenever we create an instance of our class. And each function inside of a class should have a parameter which is self, or you can call it basically whatever you want, but the self is the most common one. And self basically means itself. It means the class itself. Okay? And what we're gonna do out here is that we're going to give our cat some attributes. For example, each cat should of course have a name, and it should also always have it should also have an age, and we want to go ahead and pass this as parameters. And if you go ahead and actually add a parameter into the underscore init function, whenever you want to create your cat, you have to put in those things in. So in this case, there should be a parameter of name and there should also be an age. Okay, and what we're going to do is that this is of course not a part of the class itself. So what we want to do is that we want to use that self in here, and then a dot. This dot basically goes and if we want to access something in the class, we have to use dot. Okay, and After this dot, we're going to say whatever we want to. In this case, our attribute name is going to be name. I'm going to set it equal to whatever we pass in as a parameter into name. Okay, and we're also going to do the same thing with age. So self.age is equal to age. Okay, and let's go ahead and make our cat to be able to meow. And in order to do that, we're going to make another function. In this case, it's going to be meow. Okay, and this is of course going to take itself. Okay, and what we're going to do is that we are going to print meow. But now let's actually go through like a usage of defining a name and an age. So instead of saying meow, we can say the name meowed. So I think that will be much better. So in order to do that, we're going to use some of this concatenation, and we're gonna use our self and then dot name, which will of course give us the name of our cat. So now it's gonna actually make a cat. I'm going to store a cat in the variable, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is that I am going to go ahead and give all the arguments of our cat. So in this case, it has to have a name, alright? And our name is going to be, let's say, Mr. Meowie, because he's gonna meow. And we're going to give the age of 11, which that's actually a lot for a cat. And now let's go ahead and make our cat meow. In order to remember, we use dot whenever we want to go ahead and access something from a class. And meow. And now if we go ahead and run this thing, and boom, we can see that Mr. Meowie has just meowed, and I had to put a space in here, but I didn't. Now sure, our cat class thingy is very great. However, let's say that I don't want only cats, I want dogs, I want birds, I want Komodo dragons. So, if I go ahead and make all of classes for all of these things, I mean, there's something in common in all of them, do you agree? Each animal has to have a name and an age. So, it's kind of hard to go ahead and put these things for all of the animals over here. Now, this is only two attributes, but what if you were working on something serious and it was like 1,000, and you might be changing that later. That would be just a nightmare. So this is when class inheritors come in. So what I want to do is that I want to go ahead and make a parent class of animal. Okay, and what this is going to do is that this is going to have the essentials of a class that is a part of an animal. So I'm going to put this thing which should be absolutely everywhere. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is that I'm going to make this cat class a child of the animal. And to that, I'm going to use parentheses and then the class name, okay? And then inside of the underscore init function, something pretty important that I want to do is that I want to go ahead and inherit everything properly from this animal class. In order to do that, I'm going to use something that's super, okay, and then a dot, and then we have to use this underscore init, so underscore init, and this fills in some parameters. So actually, we do have to have these parameters is still in here, and we have to fill this one with a name and an age, okay? And now, this is the same thing. If I go ahead and run it, this is the same thing. However, it will now make it much easier if I want to go ahead and make other classes that are all an animal. Sadly, W3 School Story Editor does not allow for multiple files, but something pretty important in Python is modules. So let's say I have a file called hello.py, and .py is the file extension for Python files. And I have a function in here called hello, which will simply print out hello world. And I have a file called main.py, and I want to go ahead and access this hello function. Well, as long as they are in the same directory, I can actually use something known as import, and then the name, it doesn't have to include this .py over here, and this will simply import anything from this hello.py to my main.py. And if I want to go ahead and access this function in here, what I have to do is that I have to say this whatever is in here and a dot, and then whatever I want to access. In this case, I want to access the hello function, and we can go ahead and simply do that. But here's the thing: if you're working with this thing a lot, hello might be a pretty long name. So there's actually something known as, and we can go ahead and add in a brand new file name into it. And now instead of just typing hello.hello, I can just say h.hello, and that helps out all the time. Now we can also go ahead and actually import a specified thing from a module in Python. In order to that, we're going to use from, so from hello, and then what we want to import, in this case we want to import the hello function. And now we can go ahead and simply just say hello. If we're working with a module a lot and we don't want to say anything, okay, we just want to straight up get what's inside of this thing. We just want it just like if this was pasted into here. Well, in order to do that, we're actually just going to say from whatever and then import star, and this will basically import absolutely everything. So now I can just go in and type in hello, and it should do that function for me. And here's a small little thing. Python has a lot of built-in modules, and one of them is random. And random allows you to make random numbers and do random stuff. And one of these functions which are pretty useful from this random module is random range, which will give you a random number between a random range. And for example, if I want to get a random number between 1 and 10, for some reason I have to actually say 1 and 11 instead of 1 and 10, but I seriously do not know what's up with Python and indexing like this.